Welcome to meeting number 7 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of September 23rd, 2020. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will also show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules as usual. Members and witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. Please select the language that you will be using. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would with the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the directives from the Board of Internal Economy regarding masking and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officer. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. And with regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain the order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Pursuant to Standing Orders 1082, the committee is meeting today to resume its study on the accessibility and affordability of telecommunications services. As is my normal practice, I will hold up a yellow card for when you have 30 seconds left in your intervention and a red card for when your time for questions has expired. Please respect the time so that all members have a chance to question the witnesses. I would like to now welcome our witnesses. For our first panel, we have from the CRTC, Mr. Ian Scott, Chairperson and CEO, Madame Renée Doiron, Director, Broadband and Networking Engineering, and Nainano Kachi, Director, Social and Consumer Policy. I will introduce our second panel when we get to the second panel. With that, each witness will present for 5 minutes, followed by the round of questions. So we will open the floor to the CRTC for their presentation. You have 5 minutes.
Start by unmuting my microphone. I was a little intimidated by your introduction, Madam Chair. As a former soccer player, getting a yellow and a red card flashed in front of me made me very nervous. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for inviting us to appear before your committee. As you indicated, I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Renée Doiron, the Director of Broadband and Network Engineering, and Nano Kachi, who is the Director of Social and Consumer Policy at the Commission. And I'd like to begin by applauding your members for your study on accessibility and affordability of telecommunications services. We take this opportunity to reiterate the need to close the digital divide by ensuring universal access to high-speed internet and a high-quality cellular network. All Canadians, and I repeat, all Canadians need fast, affordable, and reliable broadband internet and mobile access to participate fully in today's economy and society. And this is something the CRTC has been actively advancing since declaring broadband internet a basic telecommunications service a few years ago. The CRTC's universal service objective calls for Canadians to have access to fixed broadband at download speeds of at least 50 megabits per second and upload speeds of 10 megabits per second, as well as unlimited data and an unlimited data option. It also calls for the latest wireless technology to be available to all Canadian homes and businesses and along major roads. While meeting this standard has been a priority for some time, the profound economic and social upheaval caused by the COVID-19 pandemic has reinforced the need for broadband, in communities that are underserved. Au CRTC, nous voulons que tous les Canadiens.
At the CRTC, we want and expect all Canadians to have access to broadband internet services on both fixed and mobile wireless networks so that they can work, learn, and access health care and civic institutions. We expect that they should be able to have that access, which is currently not the case. Many rural and remote communities are underserved by internet technologies. According to the latest data, 45% of households in rural and remote areas had access to the CRTC's Universal Service Objective by the end of 2019. While that's progress from the 41% who had access in 2018, far too many households are being challenged by poor internet connections. To help resolve this unfortunate reality, the Commission launched the CRTC Broadband Fund to improve services in rural and remote regions that lack an acceptable level of access. The 750 million fund, spread over 5 years, is designed to help build or upgrade access and transport infrastructure to provide fixed and mobile wireless broadband internet service in underserved areas. The key word here is help. The fund is a complement to existing and future private investment and public funding. Up to 10% of the annual amount will be aimed at satellite-dependent communities. Special consideration may also be given to projects in indigenous or official language minority communities. Our first call for applications was issued in June 2019. The call targeted the hardest to serve areas in the country, the territories, and the satellite-dependent communities.
We announced the first recipients of this targeted funding. 5 projects will share a total of $72 million to improve internet access to more than 10,000 households in 51 communities, the Northwest Territories and Northern Manitoba. The majority of these communities are Indigenous. These projects serve some of the most remote areas in Canada, where the geography and climate present unique challenges to providing broadband internet access and mobile services. And the prices committed to by the recipients must be maintained for at least 5 years after the infrastructure is built. In terms of affordability, I'll finish up, Madam Chair. In terms of affordability, recipients must provide the services at a price that is no higher than the broadband services provided by service providers in major urban areas in the same territory. Would you like me to stop there? If so, we are available for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott. Yes, you're a little over time, but I'm sure with the round of questions, we'll be able to get some more information. So with that, I'm going to start with the first round. Our first round of questions goes to MP Cumming. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the witnesses to appearing today on this very important issue. I want to first delve into the CRTC decision on wholesale rates, and subsequent to that, the ask of government to review those wholesale rates. I guess my question is, do you think you got it right in the first place?
Mr. Scott, you're still on mute.
Pardon me, I have to press the mute and unmute button. I'm sure it's not an unfamiliar issue. I have to say at the outset that I cannot speak directly to matters that are currently in front of the Commission. As members are aware, parties, any Commission decision can be appealed to the courts on questions of law or jurisdiction, and to the government. They can petition government in relation to policy concerns. The Telecommunications Act provides for that. We also have provisions for parties to appeal to the Commission. That's called review and vary applications. That is what has been done. We have received such applications, and we are in the midst of reviewing and developing the full record and reviewing that record, and will render a decision as soon as possible.
When do you expect that decision will come forth? I know that as soon as possible. Would it be before the end of the year?
I don't mean to be unhelpful, but we don't predict or signal when a decision, exactly when a decision would be released. The record is complete in that proceeding. Staff is completing its analysis, and then members at a commission meeting collectively will make a decision. And we are well aware of the significance of the file, and we are working as quickly as we can.
So is this unusual that you, given the amount of effort and the amount of time that you put into this area, for you to having to revisit this decision?
No, many decisions. This is a very fundamental decision. We receive many requests to review and vary decisions. Sometimes they are, if you will, larger and more important, more fundamental proceedings, but often it can be on more technical and narrow matters. We take all such applications and treat all such applications similarly. We seek comment, develop the record, and then make the best decision we can.
Okay, I want to move on to the broadband fund. You said 72 million's been allocated. You've closed the second round of applications. Any sense of what will be allocated through that second round as well? And are you on target to meet your goal of 100 million?
With the target, it's not so much just to be on the latter point. It's not a question of the 100 million being a target. That was what would be available in year one. As to what's available, we set aside, if you will, or identified an amount that could be dedicated to satellite-dependent areas, predominantly in the north. And the rest of the fund is obviously for all of Canada. We've received applications, as you indicated, for all parts of Canada, and we are proceeding with our assessment of that second tranche, if you will, of applications right now. And we will continue to try, pardon me, we will endeavor to get some decisions out as quickly as we can, and some projects will move in all likelihood before others.
So how is this fund different from the Universal Broadband Fund, the Infrastructure Bank Fund, the Connect to Innovate Fund, the Connecting Families Fund? We have a lot of funds going. Any comment? And is there much interaction between the various managers of all these different funds trying to come up with the goal of connecting Canadians?
Thank you very much. The difference between the CRTC's fund and others. Unlike most government funds, which are part of the budget, part of fundamentally based on taxpayers' contributions, this is a CRTC administered fund, and the monies come from the industry, not directly from taxpayers. The second distinguishing feature, I suppose, is we are an arm's length independent agency. So we cannot and are not directed by government to make decisions. We make them at arm's length. We're quasi-judicial, and we make decisions that are in the public interest, independent of government. On the last point, in terms of cooperation or coordination, our quasi-judicial nature by definition means that there's a degree of separation, but we work closely as much as we can with government. I sit on a deputy ministerial level coordination committee when we share what information we can. We work closely with ISED and other departments. For example, we work with them to developing the mapping technology to track the progress. And we provide information that the department subsequently makes available on its websites in terms of projects underway and completed.
So can
Thank
you
you
offer?
very much. Unfortunately, Mr. Cumming, you're out of time. We now turn to MP Lambropoulos. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci à la...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank the CRTC for coming today to assist us with our study. First of all, a question in relation to competition. We are aware that this study we are carrying out is really to see how we can help Canadians to have more affordable rates. And in some of the wireless services announced in 2019, you had hearings to analyze competition within the market. I would like to know what policy the CRTC can put in place to improve competition on the market based on what you heard from witnesses you heard between February and July. Thank you for your question. And if I can, I will continue in English.
A minute ago, on matters that are in front of us, I'm very limited in what I am able to say. As you pointed out in your question, we held a hearing earlier this year. We are doing a major and fundamental review of wireless. It does examine the state of competition and market power. And following that, we will address in an upcoming decision any remedies or um, solutions that are required in order to further ensure the affordability of wireless services.
Merci beaucoup. Make rates more affordable?
Uh, Generally speaking, I would say competition is the best way, not rate regulation. I think the members will probably know that cellular mobile rates have never been subject to retail rate regulation since they were introduced in the 1980s. There was always a degree of competition. Clearly, we need to continue to get mobile rates down, make them more affordable, but I firmly believe that competition and a competitive market is the best and most meaningful way to do so.
Thank you very much. And as you mentioned, in today's day and age, in order to fully participate in the economy, we need to make sure that all Canadians have access to broadband, to wireless internet, to good connectivity. And so you've also mentioned that you have 5 projects that are currently underway that are there to ensure that 10,000 extra households will get access to wireless internet. 10,000 is quite far from where we need to go, and I know that we can't fix everything in one night, but what other plans does the CRTC see in the future that I know that you guys are funded and you get funding from the government, but what other plans would you suggest in the future to make sure that we get even more households connected?
So the 5 projects I referred to were the first um, award projects awarded funding with the Commission's broadband fund. In response to the second call, which was for all of Canada, we've received almost 600 applications for all regions of the country, asking for a total that add up to a total of 1.5 billion. So we have our work cut out for us, but we are working quickly to assess those projects and we'll move forward. And all of those are targeted at areas that do not have acceptable levels of broadband service. So the short answer is we have many projects in front of us, and we will be approving further projects in the coming months on a regular basis.
Thank you. And the telecommunications companies are key in succeeding in making sure that all households have access to internet. I believe that the infrastructure that is already currently there because of these companies is what allows us to offer internet services to many places, even those that don't necessarily have it yet. Um, how can we encourage telecom companies to continue to build infrastructure that would allow households that are in rural areas to get access to internet if we're also increasing competitiveness? Like, how can we balance that, in your opinion?
It's I was going to say it's a good question. All questions are good. That's a particularly difficult question. That's the challenge. Obviously, first I have to say that Our broadband projects are targeted at areas where it's uneconomic, where there isn't a business case. And so to help carriers, service providers reach that objective of providing an appropriate level of service, they need to have financial support. So that's the purpose of our fund. In terms of how you encourage them to build, I make an economic business case. You have to close the loop, and it's usually a question of financing, and that's what this fund and other government and provincial and federal and territorial funds help
Thank,
accomplish.
thank you so much.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair.
Thank you very much. Notre prochain tour.
Our next round is Mr. Lemire. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank Mr. Scott for being here. The presence of the CRTC is very important for us in our study, and I believe you're part of the solution. In 2016, the CRTC said the internet was an essential service. We're asking them to come in to set prices, and this led to a lot of discontent. Why is such an essential service being handled by the private sector? The CRTC or another public group should handle that, as the Yale report suggests, for cellular mobile services. Thank you, Mr. Lemire, for your question. Once again, this is a very complex question, and if I may, I would carry on in English.
In the hands of private providers, I suppose the starting point is because it always has been. I mean, that has been the industry structure, and the role of the regulatory agency was to supervise, regulate private sector players in their provision initially of basic telecommunication service, and now broadband and wireless services as well. And to be sure, we have a modern and highly effective system. If you will, we are just the policeman, the regulator in this, not it's not a focus on what is the best industry structure.
En ce sens-là, Monsieur Scott.
So, Mr. Scott, if you don't have the limitless power, what would be the best way to make sure that 100% of Quebecers and Canadians have access to affordable internet services? I will continue in English.
We will reach it by continuing the projects and the approach upon which we have embarked. There is the government of Quebec has been highly active. The federal government is committing funds. The CRTC is committing funds, all with the intention of moving as quickly as possible to assure that all Quebecois have access and all Canadians have access to an appropriate standard of service.
To go back to what my colleague Cummings said earlier, we believe everyone has goodwill. The departments, you just mentioned the Quebec government, but the results in my region of Abitibi, Ms. Cummings, are not good. Can you tell us if there is someone responsible for coordinating this and coming up with a global strategic vision?
The vision is clear, which is to bring an acceptable standard of service to all Canadians. In terms of coordination, I can only speak to the role of the CRTC. And as I indicated, we work closely with government, as closely as we can, given that we are quasi-judicial and operate at arm's length from government. But on technical matters, and mapping, for example, identifying areas that don't have service, we work closely together.
But my concern is the results, and the results in the field and the households, especially in a region such as mine, are not good. The regulatory policy 2016 CRTC proposes that internet providers have a certain level of revenue determined by the CRTV is based on the universal goal by contributing to the broadband service to improve service in the underserved areas, will suppliers be recognized for their entire activities, including all the subsidiaries that are connected to those companies? Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Maybe I should ask my colleague to assist me in answering your question. Madame Duaron, could you assist me in answering? Can you hear me? Yes. If I understand you well, you're wondering if internet service suppliers that have revenues of over 10 million, whether their subsidiaries are included in the 10 million. Well, in Abitibi Temiskaming, there is Bell, a significant player, but they have subsidiaries like Cablevision, Telebec that belong to them, but they can come up with a pretext. If there is a complaint to customer service in Telebec, it's Bell that ends up providing us answers. This has consequences in your global vision. When you're thinking about Bell, are you thinking about your subsidiaries? I believe the answer is yes. Okay, you think. To facilitate internet service, don't you think it is the interest that the CRTC has the exclusive responsibility of managing databases for telecommunications networks? These databases would explain what installations are where, and this would facilitate the interoperability and the deployment of new installations of the networks and some of the connectivity issues, especially in rural and remote areas. This universality service, what are the goals of it? I think that it's to have better internet connection speeds. What's the impact for citizens? Madame Duaron, would you like to continue providing some answers? Well, unfortunately, we don't really have time, but maybe in the next round you could come back and provide an answer to that question.
Floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd encourage and be open to having some time of mine used to answer that following question, please.
I'm sorry, I've lost the thread. Could you just repeat the question?
Yeah,
just in terms of, should the CRTC be the sole source?
Yes, it's following up with Mr. Lemire's question that I think you asked one of your assistants to answer.
My colleague, yes. I'm going to paraphrase, obviously, yep. my apologies. I mean, the sense is, should it all be in the hands of the CRTC, given it's our role? If that is the question you're looking to have responded to, I think it's a multifaceted problem. And I think a variety of approaches are desirable. If we think, for example, about the CRTC's fund of $750 million, if you were talking about a major infrastructure project, a very significant fiber build, for example, in the far north, the single project would consume our entire fund. So I think there are some large projects that might be better suited to having the infrastructure bank address them. There are some that are more suited to the government's universal broadband fund. Our fund is focusing on where there is no one receiving the basic service objective. So a simple example, if there's one person in the 25 square kilometer hexagon, then it isn't eligible for our fund, but it is eligible for the broadband fund of ISET.
I think that's a very helpful answer, because what I've seen over the years is program after program announced, some used, some not. And so you're the last stop. So we have to, how long do we wait? And how long do you evaluate that nobody will move on those areas before your fund will then be engaged? I think that's part of the challenge we have here, is figuring out the kind of the pecking order, so to speak, of when an area might lose out on some private sector investment, some quasi, maybe another government like municipal or provincial sector investment to connect, and then yourselves, or having no service. Is there a model that you have for that?
I think the model, if you will, that exists is directionally right. I don't know how to qualify that. We focus on the most needy areas, if you will. We fill the gap. Larger programs can focus on any number of things. I don't mean to repeat myself, but if you use the example of a very large mega project, it might require a funding from multiple provinces as well as the federal government or numerous departments. So I think, you need different types of approaches to address a very large, complex problem. I'm
Yeah.
not sure that answers your
No,
question.
it does actually. It is, and it's quite helpful because I mean, this is part of our challenge is that we literally have a dog's breakfast for rolling out across Canada, and that's and as we try to sort this out, even for affordability, it becomes a challenge too because of the types of technologies involved. When we're looking at your current supports that the CRTC has now, how many files do you have to make a decision on still for this sector, whether it be for regulating affordability or programs for protection, and then also decisions for laying out? Do you even have a guess? I mean, I know you may not be able to provide that, but how many decisions do you have to make in this file?
I just want to be sure. Are you talking specifically about the broadband fund, or are you talking about all of the various matters?
All the various
I
matters.
I I have a weekly meeting with my direct report in relation to telecom, and we have a 2-page document where we go through, the status report of the major files. I don't have it in front of me, but a quick sampling, in addition to having almost 600 applications that we have to go through for broadband. We're in the midst of the wireless proceeding. We're in the midst of a review and vary of, as we've already discussed, in relation to the rates for third-party internet access. We've launched recently a proceeding to look at the regulatory environment in the north, that of Northwest Tel. We have a proceeding underway to look at other factors that might slow down the deployment of wireless and broadband service, looking at access to utility poles. It goes on and on. I don't want to use up your time, but
No,
we have many files in front of us.
well, and that's my concern is that I think you quite frankly have the impossible tasks timeframes, and there needs to be some support, for modernizing our approach because we have a lot of investment decisions that are held up because of the CRTC, not because of the fact that people aren't working there and you don't want to move files along. That's not my. I have all the confidence in getting work done there, but I think that given the fact that Canada wants to expand these services rather quickly. And finally, I know as New Democrats, we've been saying this is an essential service and it's connected even to your basic rights. To roll it out within a few years properly and affordably, your task is insurmountable in terms of the resources provided. I mean, I don't know if you want to comment on your budgetary resources. You don't necessarily have to do that, but do you think that you have the functions to do?
My apologies, MP Massa,
No,
you're over
no apology
time.
necessary. No,
Can I just give one very quick response, Madam Chair?
Very quickly.
Just to say that, no, we do have the resources. In fact, we recover the cost of regulating from the carriers. And generally speaking, we do move reasonably briskly. We are referring to some unique processes.
Thank you very much. We'll now start our second round of questions, and we start with MP Nader. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Scott, for joining us this morning. You'd mentioned that in the second round of applications, there were about 600 applications, and I may have missed it, but how many applications were submitted in the first round?
15 or 16. I have to go to my notes, but that was, it was, I believe it was 15. Renee, Madame Doiron, is that correct?
Correct. 15.
Thank you.
And then those were and those were that's wonderful. And those were focused mainly on areas that are currently served by satellite. Of those 15 applications, were there other companies other than the single proponent that actually received funding, Northwest Tel?
There were, first of all, it wasn't Northwest Tel did receive funding in 4 of the projects. There was another in northern Manitoba that was not Northwest Tel in those initial ones. Yes, there were, Northwest Tel had some other applications, as did a number of other operators among those 15.
Okay, thank you. Now, you mentioned that you were working quickly to go through those 600 applications. Is there a timeline that you've committed to have those applications adjudicated?
No, I hope it doesn't sound defensive. We don't commit to timelines. Our processes, whether it is in assessing the broadband proposals or whether it is on another file, going back to Mr. Mass's question, is we develop a record. You know, we make sure that all parties have an opportunity to file with us, develop the record, and then make the best decision we can. And that takes, if you will, the time that it takes. But
Okay.
we are trying to move as quickly as possible on the highest value projects.
No, I appreciate that, and I guess and I'm not going to get into a debate, but I mean, the argument and the concerns that we hear is that the time that it takes to adjudicate this actually puts it in a very tough position for especially some smaller internet service providers who simply don't have the time or resources to spend their time doing application after application while waiting on applications for other applications. And I think Mr. Massey mentioned a dog's breakfast in terms of different programs supporting broadband across the country. And I think that's a great comparison because as Mr. Cumming mentioned, we have this vast array of programs all I accept your suggestion that they do different things and focus on different areas, and I agree with that in a sense. But at the same time, especially when we're talking about smaller service providers, they're spending massive resources and time doing applications for these different programs. So as a matter of principle, I would ask you, would it not be better if these were streamlined into a single window application, a single organization, a single minister accountable rather than spread out across these different programs?
So again, I can only speak to the CRTCs, and I tried to distinguish earlier why ours is different. It's not a government program. It doesn't come from taxpayers' contributions to, to a budget. It is from the carriers, and we are quasi-judicial in arm's length. So ours is different. To your point, I'm a little confused as to if you're referring to specifically to the broadband process. I'll give you an example on ours. We took the time to develop an application guide that is very detailed in order to hope to support and assist smaller players so that they wouldn't have to spend a ton of time figuring out how to apply. And we really have spent a lot of time and effort to try and facilitate that process. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does to a degree, and I'm glad there is guidelines and guidance, but it's still time consuming for smaller operations to do multiple applications for different funds. And I recognize you are different and apart, and I will leave it at that because I do want to move on to another question as well. BITS licenses, BITS. How many of those do you receive on an annual basis from new proponents?
That's not information I have at hand, but there aren't many applications. They have to be renewed from time to time. Most carriers that operate internationally have to have a BITS license, but it's not a statistic I have at hand. If you like, I can undertake to provide the committee with a number, but it's not large.
That'd be great if you could provide us with a number. And I see my time's just about up, so maybe I'll ask as well if you could provide us with a written response in terms of how many new entrants there are into the broadband market generally on an annual basis. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I see I'm out of time. Thank you.
We'll try and answer that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scott, if you could send that information to the clerk, he'll make sure that the committee circulates it amongst the members.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We'll now turn to MP Assassi. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to share my time with the member for Beaches East York, please.
Go ahead.
Okay, so thanks very much, Ali. My first question, and Mr. Scott, I recognize that you said you don't want to comment on the current wholesale rate proceeding. That's fair, but you did say the record is complete in that proceeding. And when I read the Federal Court of Appeals decision, which upholds the CRTC's decision overall, there is indication that the company did not provide company-specific information. Can you at least confirm when you say the record is complete that the companies have finally come forward with company-specific information that the CRTC had requested?
I think with respect, you may be conflating some different files. So let me just explain quickly on the review and vary applications. We received a number of them from both what we used to call telephone companies and cable operators. And then we open it up to comments from interveners. So the competitors typically then filed their arguments. We have a complete record in the sense that there are no more submissions coming in on that. And we are in the course of examining it and will render a decision. There's also a related proceeding that in which we have a continuing process. It's called the disaggregated access proceeding. And there has been some public commentary and media coverage about an area where there was specific information requested, and certain parties don't believe that cable operators provided the necessary information. That
Well,
may
I
be
was
what you're
specifically,
referring to.
well, I was referring to the productivity factor area of dispute that when the Federal Court of Appeal was walking through its analysis, the CRTC had said it is reasonable to expect that the companies have detailed company-specific equipment prices and capacities for traffic-driven equipment that they acquire on an annual basis, and that the companies had not provided that company-specific information.
Sorry, I understand your question better. Pardon me for using up some of your time. That was the court looking at our reasoning in the decision, and they upheld it.
Right.
The
So but
applications,
have the companies provided the information that had initially been requested?
the review and vary applications are not the same as
Right. Okay.
what was in the original decision. They are arguing or addressing different issues and those same issues.
Okay. When it comes to low-cost data-only plans, in 2018, CRTC identified a gap in the wireless market for lower-cost data-only plans. The lowest cost, 2 years later, the lowest cost plan I can find for 1 gigabyte is $28 through Virgin Mobile. Do you view that as low cost enough?
If you want, I can go search for some metrics in terms of in terms of what are the current rates.
Well, before
again,
instead of doing that, I'll ask some specific questions then. So, does the CRTC have an analysis of what a basic data amount would be required if an individual was using it for basic browsing and VoIP services?
There are lots of views on that. That was one of the issues that was certainly discussed in the wireless proceeding, and a variety of groups, both those arguing for particular targeted services, and other stakeholders have defined what they believe is a basic service, but there isn't a defined basic service by the commission. No.
Right. So, though it ought there not to be at some point, I mean, when you talk about a gap in the wireless market for lower cost data on plans, unless you know what that basic service provision ought to be, how do you determine ultimately what should be made available?
Well, we don't direct. The competitive market determines what products are available. We're trying to ensure that the pricing for that service continues to go down as it has been. The gap.
So on that point, just because I'm short of time, because I want to get to that costing point or the cost point for, say, any of these carriers in providing. I found $50 for 10 gigabytes from Freedom. That was the best plan I saw. But others, it was $30 in the range of $30 for 1 gigabyte. But if say they were required to provide 2 or 3 gigabytes of data, what is the additional cost to the carriers of providing that additional? Are they at some capacity that they can't provide more, or what is the additional cost to them if they were to say poor Canadians who can't afford basic internet service, basic mobile services, instead of 1 gigabyte, we're going to provide you 3? What's the cost to the carrier?
So the retail wireless rates are not based on, in a regulatory sense, on cost. We don't rate regulate wireless rates. So I can't speak to what the delta would be. Sorry, Madam Chair.
My apologies. So we will now go to Deputy Lemire.
Mr. Lemire, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Madam Chair, the data banks clarifies who exploits which and where, and there is more global facility. They can develop new networks, and we can also fill up some of the connectivity gaps in the remote and areas and rural areas to facilitate the process. Is it not an interest of everyone for the CRTC to have the exclusive responsibility to managing the data banks in terms of operation and replacement of communications networks?
We addressed this question, at least in part, in submission to the expert panel that was looking, that reported on last year. The issue of support structures is critical. The question of jurisdiction about them is complex and frankly not my not something that the commission can decide. There are some complex constitutional issues involved. There are municipal rights involved. So there isn't a simple answer. But I guess fundamentally, if you are saying, is it a problem that there are divided jurisdictions? There's a problem in the sense that you need multiple approvals and it takes long and it's complicated. And so it does slow down or is a barrier to deployment. And we do have an open process that is looking at that issue.
Could you explain what is fundamental universality service and what are the goals? Is it access and speed? Is it related to just speed? Yes, generally, that's what it is. So I would like to come back to my question earlier about when you answered earlier, how do we make sure that we can create more competition? One of the issues in a rural area such as mine in Abitibi-Temiskaming, it's impossible to have any competitors. How can you facilitate the presence of more competitors? Once again, if you allow, I would answer in English.
In the way that we ensure or promote competition in areas where there is only one or a smaller number of providers is to allow resale, is to allow access to third parties to then provide service using their facilities. Sorry, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess I want to make sure that my question is not taken out of context, is because I think the regulator is critical for Canadians. And when we've looked at the models that have been presented by the government over the years, the end result is that we have amongst the highest gigabytes per cost in the world. And so is that not an indication that the regulation that we've had right now has not been sufficient in protecting consumers?
Can I just ask quickly for a clarification? Are you talking now about wireless service?
Yes, with wireless service, and you know, in particular wireless service. And I know this is not again this is more of a policy question than it is about putting blame on any particular component. It's more of a policy, because it's what we got at the end of the day, and I don't think what we got right now is a good spot cost effectiveness for Canadians.
I'll try and answer quickly so I don't use up your time. I think there's a couple of factors. One, comparisons are hard. I mean, there's just so many factors, so we do need to look at them carefully. But you are right. We have higher prices. We also, though, have a very high standard of coverage. 98% of Canadians have access to LTE, the latest and most modern technology. That's not true in many of those countries, including our neighbors to the south. And we have a problem about pricing and affordability. And that is what we are focused on at the moment in our major review of wireless.
Fair enough. And do you believe, though, that I guess, that there has been enough, I guess, here's the thing, is that the governments have collected over $22 billion from spectrum auctions. Has that policy of collecting in money and then trying to do smaller programs and services later been effective, or is there's an opinion the CRTC has about our spectrum auction being more geared to actually covering Canadians and keeping prices lower versus out of actually taking in money and then hoping things work out later.
I mean, it's not, the CRTC doesn't have a view about how the government should allocate funds in that sense. But I guess the important point in the question is if you took $22 billion from any source and directed it to the problem, obviously it would have a big impact. But you know, it could have come from any source.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for the witnesses.
Thank you. Our next round of questions goes to MP Sloan. You have the mic for 5 minutes.
Oh, great. I thought I only had 2.5, so that's perfect. I just wanted to ask, so in relation to the August 2019 decision, and if I can sort of summarize that, and it may not be a perfect summary, but basically it decided that the large carriers were overstating their costs or essentially gouging wholesale providers. And this decision corrected rates based on evidence and ordered repayments for the past 3 years. And in that report, you used the words very disturbing. And you know, I'm just wondering, in regards to a decision like that, which I think is very important in the context of providing internet service to Canadians, why not implement those rates now, even though you're doing a review on it? I mean, you know, I understand that while the case was before the Federal Court of Appeal, the court suspended the implementation of these rates. But since the Federal Court of Appeal has essentially confirmed those rates, why not put them in place now, pending the outcome of this review?
Thank you for the question. So just quickly, I think it's important that I just recharacterize what our decision is. We had a large process where we received multiple submissions about what were the correct costs. And we established interim rates while we deliberated on that. And ultimately, we chose on costs that resulted in reductions to the proposed costs filed by the incumbent companies. And the interim rates, once they're made final, go back to the first point and parties are made whole. So I just characterize it slightly differently. As to the issue of why they're not in place, as you mentioned, the courts had a stay until recently. In the applications for review and vary made to us, there were also requests for a stay. We didn't address that at the time because there was a stay imposed by the court. Once the court removed its stay, we had to consider that. And based on the applications made before us, they met the test and we granted the stay until we finish our work.
So would it be true to say that the decision that was made August 2019 in terms of wholesale rates has never, in fact, had implementation in the real world? So was there a time in which those rates were applied before the stays were put in place?
The interim rates that have been in place. Then the commission made rulings on final rates. Those final rates have not been put in place.
So the decision in August 2019 was an interim decision?
No, the August 19 decision were the final rates, proposed final rates.
Right. So they have not been implemented yet?
No, because they went to the courts and obtained a stay. And then we granted a stay recently while we complete our review and vary application.
Right. So I just wanted to ask you a further question. You've mentioned a few times that the CRTC is an independent body, quasi-judicial. Your activities are subject to government direction through various ministers, including the Minister of Industry. And I'm just wondering, the press release that Minister Baines put out in August, and let me just see the date here, August 15th. So in that, he characterized the decision that was made in August 2019, and I'm summarizing again, but as not entirely correct in terms of the balancing act. Would you guys at the CRTC look at that press release and say, and view that as government direction, or is your decision-making process entirely independent of that release?
Our decision-making process is always independent. the government has the power to review and vary, to vary a decision, or they could send it back for reconsideration. The order in council that was issued at that time didn't do so, and it acknowledged that the matter was in front of the CRTC, and it is, and we're continuing our work.
So what he released at that time uh, essentially has no bearing on the decision-making process that you're undergoing right now.
We rely on the record of a proceeding. So we have received applications for review and vary. We have received comments or submissions from other parties, and that is the basis upon which we will make our decision.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm done, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, MP Sloan. And our last round will go to MP Assasi. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Scott. This has been very, very helpful. The first question I had, Mr. Scott, was for the last little while, for the last decade at least, we've seen many low-cost operators enter the market, but then after some time, they've been gobbled up by the big telcos. Would you care to comment about that phenomenon and advise us as to whether there is a solution to that?
I'm not sure which market segment you're referring to. I guess in the largest sense, it's a pretty normal process that businesses may launch, but they may not have either the financial wherewithal or the, if you will, economic stamina to make it in the longer run. I think, for example, of someone who's engaging simply in arbitrage, and it may be that when prices come down, they no longer have a sufficient margin within which to operate, and the business becomes more difficult. We don't review, we don't have responsibility for reviewing market concentration in the sense of for example, the Competition Bureau looks at mergers and acquisitions. We don't review mergers and acquisitions unless they had a fundamental impact or they related to Canadian ownership.
Thank you for that. Now, another question I had is insofar as connectivity is concerned, there appears to be a lot of potential by using satellites. What would you say about the use of satellites to ensure that more Canadians are connected?
Satellites play a very, very large role today, I guess perhaps unnoticed or unappreciated, but they are all what are called geostationary satellites, but they do provide service today. They provide television, telecommunications, GPS, and so on. A lot of the discussion today is about the low Earth orbit proposals or systems that are being built, and indeed they hold a great deal of promise as they are a substitute for fiber. They can provide low latency, high throughput services to individuals who aren't close to traditional points of presence of telecommunications providers.
Thank you for that. Now, late last year, the CRTC launched a survey asking Canadians about mobile wireless services. Could you share with this committee what some of the principal findings of that survey were?
I think the survey you're referring to is probably the one we conducted in the context of the current wireless proceeding, and the survey results are part of the record of that along with the public hearing that we held in February, and I would say thousands of pages of submissions. So all of that is a part of our current review, the file that is in front of us, as I mentioned earlier.
So anything in particular you would like to say about that exercise? Anything that came to light?
I mean, if you're asking me to characterize, if you will, what Canadians think about wireless service, generally speaking, they'd like it cheaper. They'd like more gigabytes of capacity for less money, as would I, as I'm sure all of you would.
Absolutely. Now, that's a great segue to the next question I had, which was regarding the affordability tracker. How would you assess the affordability tracker?
I'm not sure what you mean by tracker in that context. Could you explain, please?
it's my understanding that there is this new instrument to try to quantify affordability for Canadians. So I was wondering if
there's a number of the commission regularly receives filings and tracks all manner of telecommunications statistics. We do so in cooperation with Statistics Canada. Also, the industry department, I said, also has developed a system for tracking the prices of wireless in relation to their policy framework that asks the carriers to reduce their rates by 25%. That's not part of the CRTC's role.
Absolutely. So last question. One of my constituents actually put this to me a few weeks ago. The question was, why does it appear that the CRTC actually does a more robust job regulating cable companies than it does mobile services?
Very quickly, as you're out of time.
I would simply say it's not the case. We regulate everyone as required. No, not one group or group of companies more robustly than others. We always try and regulate in the public interest, and we deal with problems as they arise.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.
Thank you very much. And that ends our first panel. I'd like to thank Mr. Scott and your two directors for being with us this morning. And what we'll do is we'll suspend momentarily so that we can get the next panel on board. So with that, I will just suspend momentarily.
Thanks.
from the Competition Network Operators of Canada, Mr. Matt Stein and Mr. Jeff White, and from Open Media, Ms. Laura Tribe and Ms. Erin Knight. So we will start with the Competitive Network Operators of Canada. You will be able to present for 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
My apologies in advance. I was told that I had 7 minutes, so I will go as quickly as I can. Sorry about that. I'm Matt Stein, President and Chair of the Competitive Network Operators of Canada, or CNOC, the industry association for the competitive side of the telecommunications industry, the side of the industry that brings internet to the homes of over 5 million Canadians. CNOC's mission is to increase the level of competitive choice, add value, and boost innovation in the delivery of communication services to Canadians. Additionally, I am the CEO of Distributel, one of the largest independent ISPs in the country, although my comments today are for CNOC. Also appearing with me is Jeff White, Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs for CNOC. The internet is an essential service, and that's never been more evident. But at the same time, large Canadian telecom companies have never been more powerful or less accountable. When it comes to pricing, it's no secret that Canadians pay some of the highest prices in the world. Perhaps then it really should be no surprise that Canada is also home to 3 of the most profitable telecom companies in the world. Are Canadians getting what they need in terms of speeds, packages, pricing, services, customer service, and otherwise? The simple answer is no. CNOC member companies, which are investors and job creators, use the mandated wholesale access to large carrier networks to compete with the big former monopolies on price, quality, and customer service. We do this by paying rates set by the CRTC and which the CRTC determines based on the underlying costs plus a fair and reasonable markup, which ensures the big carriers continue to earn a profit, even when it's our members that load customers onto the network rather than their own retail operations. Our customers love us, and more Canadians would, if they could, turn to us because of the way we do business. Smaller competitors have been a key part of the Canadian telecommunications landscape since the government started allowing competition against the former provincial monopolies. The current government and previous ones, as well as the CRTC, have recognized that without smaller competitors, the large carriers would have too much market power, resulting in higher prices, lower innovation, and poor customer service. In fact, the current government committed in its 2019 policy direction, as well as during the last campaign, to make competition a key pillar of its commitment to affordability and innovation in Canadian telecom, helping the middle class move forward. While the CRTC has, over the years, put in place several measures to facilitate competition, the incumbent carriers have, through lawyering and lobbying, put so much pressure on the system that today competition hangs on by a thread. Whenever the CRTC delivers a decision they don't like, the incumbents protest, wait for the last minute to appeal, not because of doing what's right, but they're creating a delay, because a delay is a win. Every day of a delay is another day of acting without being kept in check by competition. I want to briefly outline a very timely example that was discussed at this very committee earlier in the week. As you're aware, the CRTC's decision of August 2019 set final rates for high-speed services. And when it did so, it said the rates that we, the independents, had been paying the incumbents for years were in many instances 73% too high and corrected the rates accordingly. It also ordered the incumbents to repay years of the overcharging, just as the CRTC warned them they would do in 2016, to the tune of $325 million. Just to underscore that, $325 million that the big phone and cable companies overcharged small and medium businesses across the country for years. As a result, competitors took swift action, lowered prices, raised speeds, improved their packages. But not surprisingly, the incumbents took that to the Federal Court of Appeal, as was just discussed earlier today. And why not? The risk of delay is nil to them. So today, small competitors are still paying the old inflated rates, cannot access the millions of dollars of refunds that they're entitled to. If the CRTC's final rates, the corrected rates, were in place, overcharges would have been repaid. I guarantee competitive service providers would already be hard at work innovating, lowering prices, and investing in affordable access for Canadians. We were confident the CRTC was going to stand by that decision, but something the Governor and Council did in August really concerns us. Although it didn't send the decision back, it did take the unprecedented step of adding some strange language in the preamble, which seemed to question whether an investment balance had been struck, despite the fact that the CRTC's process by definition takes that into account, not only by considering investment, but requiring a fair and reasonable return. Because of that, we're now very concerned. The government might be backing away from its commitment to Canadians. The actions of the CRTC are not enough if the government does not stand behind its work with the support it needs. Finally, the best investment that could be made in Canadian telecom affordability right now does not originate from government coffers. It originates from a reaffirmation of the current government, of the role competitive service providers play in delivering on the goals of competition, affordability, and innovation, and letting the CRTC do its work. Canadians deserve better. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, and I apologize for going over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stein. Just a reminder to the witnesses, I'm not sure if you were at the beginning. Yellow card means you have 30 seconds remaining. Red card means you're out of time. With that, we will turn to open media. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I also was under the impression we had 7 minutes, so I'll try to do my best to fit it in 5. Good afternoon. My name is Erin Knight. I lead Open Media's work on internet affordability and accessibility, and I'm joined here today by our Executive Director, Laura Tribe. First, I'm speaking to you today from Calgary as a guest on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai Nations, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Tsuut'ina Nation. This area is also situated on the homelands of the Métis Nation. Open Media last testified before this committee in May, and on closing the digital divide, we said, do it now, do it right, and don't leave anyone out. But almost half a year later, Canada's digital divide has actually gotten worse. While the Universal Broadband Fund shows great promise in getting a substantial number of rural households connected to higher speeds by the end of 2021, the government's inaction during the first 7 months of the pandemic made certain that, on average, rural and remote Canadians are no better connected today than they were in March. According to recent data from the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, rural internet speeds have remained stagnant throughout the pandemic, while urban speeds have significantly increased. On average, urban internet users now see speeds 10 times faster than rural users. The digital divide has deepened simply by a failure to act. In the spring, emergency COVID-19 policies from Canada's ISPs were a positive measure that truly helped people. These policies granted customers freedom from overage charges and the fear of disconnection for missed payments. The majority of these reprieves, however, have now been gone for months. The government took no action to share the burden of these supports or ensure that they would last until the pandemic crisis was over. We're now seeing second wave lockdowns all around us. Just this week, Alberta sent every student from grade 7 to 12 home from remote learning until the end of the year. We know that not every student can afford an adequate home internet connection that supports this, but the government still has not stepped up to help people struggling to pay their telecom bills. In our May testimony, we shared that 1 in 10 people in Canada do not have internet at home, many of them due to the high cost of plans. But since then, internet prices in Canada have actually gotten worse. Cabinet's decision in the wholesale internet rates appeal this August directly led to higher retail prices from smaller internet providers who are struggling to stay alive. All this to say, 5 months since we last testified, the government's actions have been a far cry from do it now, do it right, and don't leave anyone out. It's clear that real action to improve the affordability and accessibility of telecommunication services in Canada could not come at a more crucial time. But if this attempt to close the digital divide is going to be any different than the countless others that we've tried before, we need to set a few things straight. First, let's dispel the myth that access to an internet connection is more important than how affordable that connection is. In reality, there are 3 main components to bridging the digital divide, and they're all equal in importance. 1, availability, aka infrastructure. 2, quality of connections. And 3, affordability. Is what exists accessible to those who live there? You can build it, and you can even build it state of the art, but until everyone in Canada can, at any income level, can afford it, the digital divide will persist. Second, let's dispel the myth that it's a good strategy to only focus on one of these 3 components at a time in a silo. We can't connect the country to quality internet and then try to tackle the cost. They need to be addressed in tandem. Without affordability, there is no accessibility. For those who have access but can't afford it, when can they expect to start using the internet? 2031. And for rural residents, we can't afford to let their desire for access be used to support a one option, one provider, one high price solution. We can't replicate the structural market competition problems we already have in new areas and just be happy that they're technically served. This is especially true for households that are served only by satellite plans. And finally, let's dispel the myth that affordable internet in Canada is out of reach. There are clear, simple things that could be done to improve the cost of internet in this country. First, you need to support more competition. For both home internet and cell phones, Canadians do not have enough choice. More competition is the ticket to lower prices. Every time a policy, funding announcement, or regulatory decision supports the incumbents, you're helping to keep the internet unaffordable. And second, do your part. Make sure your constituents know that they're eligible to apply for programs like the Universal Broadband Fund and support them in their applications. Hold Big Telecom to account in policies, platforms, and testimony here regarding their price gouging tactics and ever-increasing retail rates. It's somewhat discouraging to be here talking about the digital divide when it's gotten worse since we were last here. But I remain optimistic that if we can work with urgency, the next time we meet, we can be celebrating success. Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And we'll now turn to Mr. Rafferty. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is John Rafferty. I'm the President and CEO of the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, known as CNIB. CNIB has been a part of the Canadian landscape for over 100 years with a continuous mission to make inclusion and accessibility for all Canadians who are blind or partially sighted. Currently, the Government of Canada data shows there are 1.5 million Canadians living with sight loss. We have a long history of working with governments, going back more than 90 years in advocating for the Accessible Voting Act for Canadians who are blind, working most recently with the government across all disability sectors on Bill C-81, the Accessible Canada Act. Today, we're here to talk about smart devices, affordability, and access. Smart devices over the last 5 or 6 years have become something that has changed the way Canadians with disabilities are able to interact. Now, with developers developing new applications all the time, a smart device can allow me to navigate safely in the physical environment. It can allow me to read prescriptions when I can't see and safely take medication. It can keep me connected the way it keeps others connected, but it provides devices and applications that are about a person being able to interact in the community. There's nowhere more important than in areas of education and employment that access to high-speed data and affordable plans are more important. For Canadians who are blind or partially sighted, with a full-time employment rate of just 28%, affordability of data is something that is critical. These devices may be smart, but if they're not connected, they really are not. So more and more now is the time for us to look at closing this gap, look at addressing issues related to applications that are there for the safety of individuals who are blind or partially sighted, to even consider looking at applications that should be exempt from data charges at all. We urge this committee to take a look at both the affordability, the access for both rural and remote Canadians, and also for all Canadians with disabilities. I look forward to questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Again, my apologies to the witnesses for the constraint in time. If you'd like to submit to the clerk your full speech or any other brief, please feel free to do so, and he'll circulate it to the committee members. With that, we will start our round of questions. Our first round of questions goes to MP Dreeshen. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to the witnesses. We appreciate you being here today. We are discussing accessibility and affordability in our internet. And I think one of the issues that we all look at is those in high density look at the affordability, and those in rural and remote look at accessibility first. And with my apologies to the second last speaker, Aaron, you know, I know that costs are important as well, but when you have no service, that's where you start looking at anything to try and keep things going. I had mentioned earlier my internet service dropped twice this morning. There's a little bit of snow and so on. Within 20 miles of Highway 2 here in Alberta, I will lose cell phone coverage twice. You know, so that's the sort of thing that we have, and that's one of the reasons why it would be important if we can take a look at something new for us for the future. Certainly, you know, concern about some of the comments that were mentioned about no business case for service in rural and remote areas. And one of the discussions that we had was about satellite broadband, but also we had discussions, you know, that perhaps that too is going to have some major issues. So I'm wondering if, and I direct my question to you, Mr. Stein. You've been looking at wholesale rates by CRTC. You've looked at the costs and the profits that are associated with this. What is the business case that you see as far as satellite service, and will there be a time when it will be able to put enough pressure on the major telecoms for the pricing to become more reasonable and in line with what we would see in other parts of the world?
You're still on mute.
That would be my technology background shining through. So I would say that based on what we understand and what we see of satellite technology, to truly compete with the kinds of speeds of 5G, or even more importantly of fiber, it's going to be a long time before that brings the kind of competition that would be required to truly drive down prices. It will be a great technology to very widely offer some and meet some of the basic service objectives, but certainly not get the kind of speeds that Canadians would expect in more densely populated areas. And in fact, I think that all Canadians should ultimately get.
Well, thank you. And again, you know, one of the major issues, and perhaps you can comment on this, because the CRTC, the decision that we thought had been made that was going to give some opportunity for the small providers to be able to be engaged. You spoke about the telecoms, the lobbying and delay that's associated with it. That wasn't really what we heard from the minister. So I'm wondering if you can kind of give us a feel for where it's going to go in the future, and are we going to continue to see these kinds of pressures being put on the government and the minister when it comes to decisions as far as rates are concerned?
At this point, I would obviously be speculating, but we can look at the history quite easily and say that it's been a recurring theme, and it's only been ramping up and getting worse. Whenever the incumbents see something they don't like, which is a lot, they race to appeal. They appeal. This time they appealed to the CRTC, the government, and the Federal Court of Appeal all at the same time. Earlier today, when the chair of the CRTC referred to the fact that the final rates were never even implemented, the only reason that is because it took less than the 30-day implementation period for all three of those appeal avenues to be kicked off. So I don't see that getting better anytime soon, unfortunately, because, like I said earlier, a delay is a win. So if they can't win, they're going to try to delay.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Knight, you had spoken about one of your major concerns about doing it now, doing it right, and don't leave anyone behind. But you also indicated that cabinet decisions have been a far cry from that. You know, and again, I'm a former high school teacher. You know, I think about all of the grade 7 to 12s that are now going to be back in the virtual learning mode here in Alberta. And I'm just wondering if you find that there's avenues for you to put pressure on, or are you being blocked as you attempt to get your position heard?
Do you mind rephrasing the question? I'm not sure I quite understand what you'd like me to answer.
Well, right now, as you had mentioned, that the cabinet decisions have been a far cry from what you had suggested, and so my point is, and again, as we see the need for remote access and for communities and families to be able to have something, are you seeing barriers that have been put in your way to be able to get the ear of government?
Well, what we're hearing from folks, like the parents of those kids who are at home right now learning remotely, is they're not sure when they're actually going to be brought online to affordable internet. I see my red card is up, but apologies for that. We can address it later.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Jacek. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. Your testimony today has been illuminating. I would like to start with Mr. Stein. You've obviously clearly delineated the issues that have occurred in terms of the big telecoms appealing within the 30 days, and there's a delay, and that delay is very important. Could you, or perhaps your legal counsel, give us some practical recommendations that that government might be able to put in place in terms of more or stronger mandate for the CRTC, some sort of regulatory change that would allow them to actually achieve what we've heard from Mr. Scott they want to achieve without this type of delay? Do you have some practical suggestions that could be implemented to avoid what you've described?
I have one, and then I am going to turn it over to Jeff White, our legal counsel. Number one, I would say support the CRTC and do so quickly. In the last OIC, the government released the order in council 365 days after the application, to the day. So if the answer was ultimately going to be, no, we're not going to review this we're not going to vary this because it's already under review by the CRTC, it was under review in day 39 or something like that. So it could have been, number one, a very quick response that we're not going to review it and that we support the CRTC in this and really drive it forward that way. I'm going to hand it over to Jeff for our more fulsome response.
Good day. Yes, it's ultimately a question of political will, and the current government has been clear that its stated priorities are competition, affordability, consumer interest, and innovation. The current government and previous governments have recognized the strong role that wholesale competitors bring to this market. The legislative regime has various routes of appeal that are allowed, but ultimately they're being gamed. And part of the challenge is lobbying, and that's one aspect of it, in the sense that smaller providers and CNOC members are getting out lobbied every step of the game. And there's also, we suspect, a number of ex parte communications going on with the regulator, and bringing more transparency to the lobbying activities and ex parte communications with the regulator might be a way to shed some light on that. But ultimately, this issue of delays at the CRTC and then delays being held up in court, that can be remedied simply through political will if it's there.
Thank you. Well, I'm delighted to say nobody's bothered to lobby me. So I would like to address my next question to Ms. Knight. I looked at some of the briefing notes, very well put together by our Library of Parliament, and there was reference to the Internet Code. And this is something that the CRTC has put in place. It seems extremely well intentioned. The Internet Code protects Canadians who subscribe to Internet services, and it tries to cover easy to understand contracts, clearer information about prices, bill shock protection, and greater flexibility. In terms of what you know about the application, this was introduced in the early part of 2020, and I believe Bell has already asked and received to have a delay in its application to them. But are you aware on the part of consumers if this has been helpful? Anything that you could say about this and the impact that it's having?
I will let Executive Director Laura speak to this, but I will second what Mr. Stein has said about the delays being a win, and that's certainly a part of this. But Laura, you can continue from here.
Thanks. I think the Internet Code of Conduct has been very helpful in providing guiding principles as to what customers should expect. But I think very similarly to things like the Wireless Code of Conduct, there are guidelines that are not really being enforced to the extent that customers might like. They are not aware of how either the code should be serving them or what to do if they think that it has been violated. They have not been treated in the way that they should be. And I think, even more problematically, we've seen systemically for years reports from customers, but also verified by the CRTC, that there have been misleading and aggressive sales tactics by these companies that would very clearly violate these codes of conduct, and yet with no clear remedies for these systemic solutions, all of them really being directed at individual customers being able to file complaints about their own individual experiences, it doesn't really get at the core heart of the problem of those systemic abuses.
So would you recommend that there be some sort of enforcement mechanism potentially in terms of ensuring that the follow-up is done by the CRTC and remedies or fines or some sort of way to ensure that it is effective?
I see we're almost out of time. So in short, I would say all of the above. I think we need to see stronger penalties, including financial, for the companies, but really for customers to not have to individually track every violation they see individually to be able to be their own lawyers, but to see the system correcting itself on behalf of customers and protecting them better.
Thank you very much. Notre prochain tour, c'est pour le député Lemire.
And next is Mr. Lemire. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I also noted the sentence. You said delay is a victory, Mr. Steen. Yes, that's a situation which I see, especially in my region, Abitibi, Temiskaming, Bell, Televec. We see them in conflicts with Videotron, but there is an impact on the small suppliers around the territory. My question for you, do you think the CRTC could play a role other than regulation? Could they manage the group, do some group management?
I would turn it over to Jeff to speak to sort of the ramifications or the limits of the CRTC per the Telecom Act. But we have found that for the most part, when we approach the CRTC for disputes such as those, it takes a long time to resolve. The process is very complicated, and the CRTC is reluctant to sort of point out the obvious. And I'll even give an example that is recent. Although it is more broad than just your riding, it happened during the early stage of the pandemic. When we approached the CRTC and we said, there is a problem, we don't have the capacity, we need the help. When we approached the government through ISID, we were told, work with the big carriers. I'm sure that you guys will be able to figure this out. The fact of the matter is we can't work with the big carriers because they will do everything they can to prevent us from existing, and in doing so, stopping competition. So unfortunately, I don't have much hope that the CRTC could weigh in on things like that as fast as is required to preserve competition.
So do you think that the group companies should separate themselves from distributors to make sure that companies are not doing any insider sort of trading?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Do you think that wholesale vendors should separate themselves from distributors so that people are not doing insider trading, so that they're not acting to their own benefit?
Well, yes, if regulation, and I've spoken about this recently, if we can't rely on the regulation and the regulatory regimes that exist today to preserve competition, the next step, it's not to give up and say, I guess regulation doesn't work to preserve competition. The next step is to move towards what you're referring to, I believe, which is structural separation, where there's a separation of the operations divisions and the retail arms of the large incumbent carriers. We've seen this in other parts of the world as well. I think that Jeff White, my associate, has something to say on that matter as well.
Right. Structural separation is certainly a remedy worth exploring, given some of the real-time examples we're facing. Sir, you mentioned at BTP, one of the CNOC members, eBox, has been having great difficulty trying to access the wholesale service of Cablevision du Nord. That is a Bell subsidiary. There's a wholesale regime in place. eBox signed up its first 2 customers on October 27th, promising to offer prices at 50% discount to what the incumbent is offering. But Cablevision, the Bell subsidiary, is dragging its feet and causing delay after delay. So that's the impact right there with the system and the delaying that's going on. But the CNOC members, the smaller competitors, they use that access, which is very well recognized by the government as a legitimate means to bring down prices and better service. It's just a question, though, of making sure that the regulator actually is responsive to what's happening and that the government stands behind it and saying smaller competitors are a tool for serving Canadians and giving them what they deserve.
So you're talking about regulation, but do you think that Canada's funding programs favor the 3 major companies and consequently work somewhat not to the favor of the local, smaller companies?
If the question is about funding and whether if I understand it correctly, funding and does it favor the larger enterprises? And I think the answer is yes, simply by virtue of the scale that they have. And the scale they have is by virtue of historical monopolies that they were given by the government and head starts and access to spectrum and considerable scale. The broadband fund doesn't require wholesalers, smaller, the big players to share their network, which is unfortunate because if you can provide wholesale access, you can deliver competition and choice even for the Canadians who live in rural and remote areas. And we suggest to you that they don't deserve a second-class treatment. They deserve the same level of customer service and competition that Canadians in more dense areas deserve.
Now, maybe just one last question. How can we connect 100% of Canadians and Quebecers affordably? What should be the ideal connectivity schedule?
I'm not sure I fully understand your question, sir. Could you repeat it?
If it was you, the CRTC, doing the regulation, or if you had control of the general scheme, how should we operate to make sure that 100% of Quebecers and Canadians have access to the system affordably? As accessibility and connectivity.
Tool that the government and its regulator, the CRTC, have at its disposal to help Canadians who routinely complain about the affordability and price of customer service is standing behind the role of competition and allowing mandated wholesale access at cost-based rates plus a reasonable markup. That's the solution for universal affordable connectivity.
Thank you very much. Our next round of questions goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And obviously with COVID-19, things have heightened with regards to public awareness and inclusion and so forth. But as the NDP critic for industry for a long period of time, there's been kind of 3 major principles that I've held to, which I think are important. I think they're also important about moving, I guess, the general public in a direction this way. Is that, first of all, accessibility and affordability are the same. There's no point in having one or the other. And with that, it's supported by the structure of, using public airwaves or using land is a privilege, not a right. That's really the public entity that we have to use at our disposal to keep Canadians connected. Also believe that being connected as Canadians in an affordable and accessible way is an essential service. And lastly, that, and I spoke about this with the recent tabling of our changes for our Privacy Act. I believe in a digital bill of rights, but it's part of your human rights and it's part of your connectivity to society in a wholesome way. I just would like each guest to comment on that. You can disagree, that's great, but if you don't, but what do you think of that? I think there needs to be a paradigm shift in terms of how we approach this, because we control the regulator. We actually have the assets, being the public space, being the spectrum, or having, to grant access for the use of materials and goods and services to actually put fiber optics or towers and so forth. But at the end of the day, we're building a system here that's a dog's breakfast, that has winners and losers. And I'd maybe start with the CNIB and then ask each witness a comment, please.
Well, thank you for asking the question. I think that while I'm very interested in the answers being given by the other witnesses here, I think it's important to recognize that with more than 6 million Canadians living with a disability, more than 1.5 million Canadians who are blind or partially sighted, this isn't just about the connectivity in the rural and remote areas, which is highly critical, and there are as many proportional people living in rural communities with disabilities as in urban communities. It is about a right to access. We are solving issues of inclusion using technology today and then taking it away from people as opposed to allowing them to have proper access to it. I think we need to address all of the issues for the students who have been sent home in Alberta from grade 7 to 12 who have a disability and have lived with higher levels of poverty and are at home trying to support the education of their children, not just connecting people in rural and remote areas. It is a complex issue. I just want to make sure that the voice of disabilities stays loud and prominent when you're having the debate about access, because they're not a subset of community. They are a large portion of our communities. And I thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. Well, full disclosure, I'm a former CNIB board of directors. So at any rate, to our next witness, please.
Sure. I would just say that while bridging Canada's digital divide is extremely important, and we realize that connecting rural and remote communities will not be cheap, the funding made available through things like the Universal Broadband Fund and so forth is still the best investment the government can make to ensure that all Canadians get connected. But and while I appreciate the linkage, connectivity or accessibility and affordability are separate and distinct issues. And there's no reason that accessibility should ever come at the expense of the competitors who offer the only real alternative to the big incumbents and provide fantastic customer service and lower prices coast to coast.
Thank you. Both media, please.
I think you are right that we need a paradigm shift around this, but I think that it's also well underway. This is the second time we've been invited to speak before this committee this year about the need for connectivity and bridging the digital divide in Canada. And so I think the conversation has shifted. We understand that the internet is essential. And I don't think there's anyone here that disagrees. I think really we just need to figure out how to move forward and make it happen. And so when we look at issues like spectrum, the spectrum in Canada has largely been licensed. People have paid for those licenses, but that doesn't mean that everyone has access to cell phone services in their areas, because there are large areas where it's not being deployed. And I think looking at things like use it or lose it policies to make sure that those areas have access to that spectrum if they're not being served is put forward. And I think looking at a number of other solutions, including, supporting choice, supporting affordability, will help us step beyond trying to have the conversation around if we need the internet and really getting concrete around how to make it happen as quickly and effectively as possible in those areas that don't have it.
I think Mr. White has his hand up there. If you want to
go. If I may, Mr. Massey, this is the current state of affairs is dog's breakfast, lunch, dinner, and bedtime snack in terms of the current mess we're in terms of some of the overarching regulatory framework. That's largely the result of lawyering, lobbying, and delaying. But if we go back to basics, the Telecommunications Act contains two provisions that have stood the test of time: just and reasonable rates and no unjust discrimination. Those are your bedrock principles on which we can go forward without a paradigm shift. The telecommunications has always been regulated because it's utility-like, and to this day, it's an essential utility-like service. And on that basis, with some political will to back that fundamental foundation, with a recognized role of wholesale providers as a trade-off, a regulatory trade-off in respect of the large size of the incumbents, I think you can get to where you need to go for Canadians.
Thank you. And I see the red card, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses.
Thank you very much. Seeing as we're a little tight on time, I'm going to start the second round and give each party an opportunity to have a slot. So we will start with MP Sloan. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to pose hopefully what might be a catch-all summary question, and I'll pose it to anyone who wants to answer. So, some concerns that have been raised to me by local ISPs in my riding are along the lines that so we have an overinflation of wholesale costs, and then apparently the big telcos have been providing internet services at rates that undercut their own wholesale rates. And local ISPs feel that basically what they're trying to do is destroy competition. And one independent ISP, Tech Savvy, actually filed a formal complaint with the Competition Bureau detailing how large carriers have deviated from CRTC costing rules to grossly inflate wholesale rates for competitors while at the same time offering retail prices below the wholesale costs. So if someone could comment on that, that would be great. But I guess the issue that I have is would the implementation of the August 2019 wholesale rates in a quick and effective manner solve this? And how do we get to the bottom of this? So if someone could just comment on, do you believe the large telcos are trying to literally destroy competition? And furthermore, um, is implementing the August 2019 decision the answer to this? So whoever wants to take that.
I'll take that one. So the large telcos have said they would like to destroy the small competitors. It's not really a surprise. They're not too fond of us, as you're well aware. And in fact, it's also true that when the interim rates are set, the way that works, there is a recommended rate by the big telco. That's accepted by the CRTC because, as the chair just said to you, ultimately when it's determined, the independent, will be made whole. The corrected rate will be deployed, such as it was to be in 2019-288, the decision that came out in August of last year. But it's important to understand that all the while, those large incumbents were, through their direct retail brands or their flanker brands, selling below the interim rates, very often, both on promos and on standard packages. Implementing those rates would be a massive leap forward for the industry and for Canadians. A rush to implement those rates as fast as possible is key. It's not the only thing. Keep in mind, that is for only the slow speeds. The fastest speeds, the CRTC is still working on those. So ushering forward and helping the CRTC by giving them the support that they need to get those things out the door without any further intervention is important too.
Okay, and I'm just going to jump in again. I notice my time is ticking down. So part of the decision, part of the response by the minister to this, where he suggested that the decision was not potentially made correctly in terms of its balancing, had to do with, I think, the threat that the big telcos made of not doing any further investment. Now, is that threat realistic? And if so, how do we address it?
No, it's not realistic. They say that every time. I mean, they said that back a decade ago. They said, look, if we have to offer higher speeds, we're never going to build fiber. It's on the public record. The CEO of Bell Canada announced this to the CRTC. We will never build fiber, he said. Well, they're still doing it. And they were required to give those speeds. They made the same claim in August of 2019. They said, if these are the rates, well, then we're not going to build wireless for Canadians. We're going to hold back $100 million of investment. Some of the most efficient investment that they have in their entire network. It's not reasonable to think that they would cede their market to their competitors. If you believe they're competitive at all, you've got to believe they're going to continue to build. They always make those claims and they never hold water. Never. We shouldn't believe them now either.
Okay, so essentially you're saying call the big telcos bluff, but in regards to, or if you could just let me ask my final question. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. In regards to this particular decision, it seems as if the telcos initiated a legitimate right of appeal in court, and it may have been for frivolous reasons, but they were able to. And the court initiated a stay of the implementation of these rates. How do we get faster implementation of decisions like this? Well, I mean, we'll never be able to eliminate rights of appeal to courts. How do we get this done?
Again, there may be a more fulsome answer that Jeff would think of, but I would say that there's nothing that stops the CRTC from setting interim rates. They set the interim rates based on the recommendation of the big carriers, which of course are always astronomically high. But another approach they might take is to say, well, hang on, those rates don't make sense. Bell Canada, for example, recommended $122 per fiber access, but they're selling it for $60. Let's just take a retail minus approach like we have out east. I appreciate the red card. I apologize.
My apologies. Our next round of questions goes to MP Joe Howry. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all our witnesses, especially those who are coming back for the second time. Let me start with Mr. Stein, actually. Mr. Stein, you talked about the large telcos hating the small players and wanting them out of the market. You also, in your opening remark, you talked about that they're growing more powerful and less accountable. Can you expand in how we can bring a balance to that power and how we can make them more accountable? And I know, and I'm interested in, aside from introducing more competition kind of response, I want to see how we can bring more, balance to the power and increase accountability.
I'm going to turn it over to Jeff for some of that, but I would say the first step is to stand behind the CRTC who works on this every single day. But I'm going to hand it over to Jeff for a more complete response.
One of the ways forward would be for the Commission to actually enforce its decisions and its regulatory requirements. The Commission has numerous powers under the Telecom Act already, and it has the power to impose administrative monetary penalties. It appears, though, there's been a reluctance to enforce compliance with the requirements.
What would you attribute that reluctance to, sir? Sorry for interrupting you, but what would you attribute that reluctance to?
I wouldn't want to speculate on behalf of the Commission. However, I do believe that there's a lot of ex parte communications happening, which may be normal course in the regulation of a major industry, but there may be some back channel discussions going on that are happening. And I'm not saying in a way that's unduly influential. However, it may just be a question of will as well, because every time the regulator tries to do something, there's a fight, there's a delay, there's a fight. Some of the incumbents don't even respond to Commission questions. We're asking them to propose network configurations. And that is, gambits like that are cumulatively adding up to strangle competition in Canada right now.
So how can we make them more accountable?
To catch the shareholders' attention through penalties, which the Commission has as a remedy.
Thank you. I'd like to go next to open media. Madam Knight, you talked about the fact that urbans during the COVID-19, they got 10 times faster service than rural. Aside from the fact that now I understand the demand was higher, everybody was working from home, kids were studying, at home, there was a need for more bandwidth and more data. But what would you attribute the fact that the urban was getting 10 times faster speed than rural?
Thank you for the question. Overall, we've seen historic underserved communities in rural Canada. It's just not the place where big telecom has historically put their interest, because the business case is usually not there. And so we saw the investment happening in urban communities and suburban communities because there was no push in these other programs like the Universal Broadband Fund during this time that was supposed to help connect these communities.
So do I understand that it was easier for the big telcos who are in the urban area to open the valve and get much higher speed, whereas the smaller providers, which are in the rural area, could not open up the valve and get as much speed because they're dependent on the large telco? Am I reading that right?
Laura, I think you wanted to jump in, it seemed.
Yeah, so yes, you are reading that correctly. And I think when we're looking at rural Canada, users are already maxed out. They are getting the most speeds available to them and have been the entire time. Whereas in urban centers, it has been much easier for customers to call in and increase their plans, to make the switch from cable to fiber in an option that's just not available in rural.
Thank you. I got 30 seconds, and I want to go back to Madam Knight. What actions the government can take? You seem to think that's because of the government in inaction, and I want to understand what actions the government can take.
Overall, the approach that needs to happen that we're hearing is that this piecemeal approach to connecting all of Canada is not going to be effective. We need a national approach to connecting everyone in Canada where they know when they'll be connected and what service they'll get.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next question goes to Député Lemire.
Mr. Lemire, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for respecting the speaking time for all political parties. That's quite pleasant, especially in the circumstances. I would like to ask another question to Mr. Sterner-White. You say you're one of the witnesses that I found the most interesting. You gave some added value in the industry community to give 100% access to Canadians. Do you think that we need satellite waves, SpaceX, for example, that came last week, because the government seems to support this strategy?
All the technologies that we have available to us. But in the end, terrestrial access is going to provide a lower latency, higher quality access. So yes, satellites will absolutely be an important part of the strategy, but we need to put everything behind this. We need to use all of the technologies available.
Merci. Thank you. A question for open media. Do you think it's fair that the wholesale market be in the hands of the same private companies? You seem to say last May that internet should be nationalized. Today, you're talking about more competition as the best way to drop prices. Is internet connectivity, should it be in the hands of the state or managed by a public-private partnership, for example?
I think at this point, nothing is off the table when it comes to improving affordability in Canada. At this point, connecting everyone to affordable internet relies a lot on competition, but I think nothing is totally off the table. Laura, if there's more you want to add to that, feel free.
I think that if we're looking at options like structural separation, which were brought up earlier, we are very supportive of trying to ensure that competing business interests don't interfere with good policy or service. And that's an option. I think if we're looking at something like nationalizing, that's a conversation we're willing to have, but we're also looking at some of the ways to maybe try and save the existing system and deploy service as quickly as possible, while happy to entertain those conversations, recognizing that's not going to fix things overnight either.
So in conclusion, are you satisfied with the CRTC's work in terms of promoting more competition?
Sorry, my connection cut out for a second. Can you just repeat the last part of your question?
Are you satisfied with the CRTC's work in promoting greater levels of competition?
I think there's a lot of room for more support for competition from the CRTC. We haven't seen the results on things like MVNOs, on wireless, or the support for smaller providers that we would like to make sure that there is actually a sufficient competitive marketplace.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
A round of questions goes to MP Massey. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to move back to the CNIB with regards to not only just the complications that is, inherent for an individual to run their own wireless and a wired network at home. What has been the status of applications for support on devices and so forth? I've noticed that there's been several government initiatives to assist small businesses, medium-sized businesses, some large, with investments, but there seems to be a void at times of inclusion of the applications for persons with disabilities. So I wanted to note that and give you an opportunity to talk about that cost and if we're accidentally baking in some barriers to some of the tech supports we could be doing just by leaving that as part of the conditions of terms of some of the loans, grants, and programs that companies are enjoying.
Yeah. So, and thank you very much for the question. I think that obviously it's been unprecedented over the last 8 months with everyone's workplaces going virtual, with our schools going virtual. But not only that, for Canadians who are blind or partially sighted specifically, moving to touchless environments, creating new technologies that are inaccessible in their very nature, um, has layered on additional stresses. I think that I'm glad to be here. I know the focus of people's questions has been very much to the other two witnesses, and understandably, I do want to make sure that everyone remembers that the more than 6 million Canadians that do not get supported the same way in how they participate in the world of work, how they contribute to our economy, and there is no reason why they shouldn't. It is inherent barriers around access and affordability that is growing the divide between the have and have-nots from a data perspective. And I think that that's something that has to end. And I'm glad that this committee is looking at it with a level of vigor.
Thank you. And that would go for low vision people as well, too. I know that that's a group forgotten. Well, thank you very much. I see the card, Madam Chair, and thank you again.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today and your patience, your excellent testimony, and for answering a lot of the questions that we have. With that, I will call this meeting adjourned.
Merci au travail des interprètes également.
I would like to thank the interpreters for their work. Thank you, sir.